my then husband, who was sleeping with sex workers and turned out just had been lying about basically my whole life was a lie. So he became a born again Christian through this church. And so he went on a mission to some, I don't know, country in Africa. I don't even remember where they went, got baptized.
Oh, that poor country in Africa.
I know. And so now, instead of them asking for accountability for his actions, they were like, hey, back off. This is our new baby Christian. And we recognize he has some issues, but like, he's God's now, and everything is erased, and it's all good.
I want to tell these people he don't need Jesus. He needs therapy and probably some medication.
We're rolling.
We're just kicking this off.
What is this podcast about, Charity?
John Robert Stevens.
The Living Word.
The Walk.
Our Great Family Ministries.
Let's expand out into like things that matter.
Let's get it out. Let's get the story told. More time travel, more splits and witches and yogis and stuff.
This is, a true narcissist. Think about how masterful that stroke of genius was.
Yeah.
To
Yes.
get out of the line of fire by coming under the covering of Christianity.
It's actually kind of healing, coming back around and really digging in deep. And,
Traumatic at times.
we try and balance all of that. You're going to watch as two former cult members try to de-dumbify themselves by doing a podcast about the cult that they were involved in their entire life.
Thought it was a church, turned out it was a cult. Oh, there's a good tagline.
That's what it is. That's it.
Oops, I'm in a cult. You had mentioned in your first email to us that like you had specifically avoided the podcast because you thought, I've dealt with this stuff. I don't want to revisit it. Just totally understandable.
Yeah. And even more than that, just to wrap myself out a little bit and how judgy I was when it was all sort of exploding and on social media. I mean, I peaked once or twice, but for me, I was like, some of y'all that are screaming about being so upset now were some of the people who were hurting me in my life early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like, I don't know if I feel that bad for you guys. That was at the very beginning, before I really understood sort of the depth of what was happening. But that was definitely my initial reaction was like, cool. I hope you guys are work it out, but it's not my deal. And I just don't want to get involved. And so
what
I
changed that
for quite a few years. Well, your guys' podcast, which is quite a few years later. And I saw you guys pop up at some point, right? Because, we all know the same people. And so I followed you guys on like Instagram or something, but like at least a year ago, but never watched. Like I was like, no thanks. And I don't know why I followed you, but I literally never watched a single thing that you guys produced until recently. I saw the Rick Ross episode and I was like, okay, I'm an academic. I like experts. I like expert analysis of things instead of just sort of my, judgy, like people complaining about, growing up weirdly. And so I watched that one and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I watched another one. And then all of a sudden I was, watching
the floodgates opened.
Oh, that's so funny. I really like that, like different ways of like getting into it. Cause it is like, I can see that, feelings are gross and listening to people like, express feelings like that's really hard, but it's like, oh, okay, we're going to get a professional in here, like, and who's like very academic, like you're saying. And then it feels almost like safer and you start to get into
more
it
relatable.
And have some like,
something I felt like I could trust because going back to, I think it was more than just me being judgmental, although that was part of it. But I was like, I don't know that I trust these voices, right? Like these are voices that hurt me at some point, some of them. And so I was like, this is not like a trusting safe space for me. And so I'm just going to steer clear of it. But a cult expert is very objective, no personal connection to me. I can just hear what he has to say about it. And maybe he'll say it wasn't that bad, or maybe he'll say this is horrific, but I really wanted to hear his take on it, which was my entry point. And now here we are.
I think that's so interesting. Yeah, I love that. I mean, and I think I loved what you said about how, because I think so many of us have found that we thought we were, past it to a certain degree. And then suddenly things come up and you're like, oh, this was way down in there that I didn't even know there were this like depth of layers to this experience.
Yeah. And for me, even more than like, oh, this piece and that piece, I really just kind of feel basic at this point, because it's like my whole life was formed by this cult and I didn't know that. And I don't know how. I'm going to cry already. I don't know how I missed how it informed like every part, good and bad, of who I am.
Yeah.
And missed how thoroughly it devastated my family in like the most obvious ways that it did to so many. But I don't know, there was some part of me that was like, well, I got out and I chose to leave. And so I think gave myself some level of like props for leaving it all behind. But man, as I was listening to your different folks' stories that you've interviewed, I was just like, every single one of them, I could relate to all of it, and which shocked me because I always felt like an outsider. And my family was very much a fringe family, and I was absolutely like a fringe individual in the church because I could not do the submission and conformance part. I just like, it was against the very sort of nature of who I am as a human. But I wanted to fit into this community that was supposedly godly and what my family had chosen. I was born into it, and I had words spoken over me by JRS and Marilyn. And, I wanted to be a part of it and just couldn't be. And so when I left, I was definitely like, well, y'all are kind of weird. So I'm going to head out. But it didn't take away from the fact that I would have, if I could have found a way to be successful in it, I would have, right? And and I wanted to say this to you guys, and I say this with genuine humility and respect, but I was hoping to disabuse the notion that people who got out were the lucky ones, and those who didn't were unlucky, because all of us were just surviving. And so for me, survival, I could not survive within it. But like I said, truly in my heart, in my emotions, in my being, I wanted to stay. I wanted to be successful in this community because I was told it was everything.
Right.
And I couldn't. So I felt like a failure even leaving. And I left with all the conditionings and then went into the world thinking, well, I just suck, right? Like I can't even make my family work. And it was hard. And listening to different, people you've interviewed, it's a common theme that even though my life turned out great in the long run, the leaving, whether you were asked to leave or you chose to leave, was devastating and traumatizing in its own way, on its own level. And I just wanted to say that because when I hear people, I'm like, I don't feel lucky that I left. I did choose it myself, which I guess empowers me on some level,
right? But
it wrecked me all the same.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. And I hope that hasn't come across like we think that, or that anybody has said, oh, you didn't have it hard if you left early. I know that it's hell when you leave, especially like if you leave when so many people are still going strong and so many people are still in it, and you feel like, you feel like a failure. You feel like you've lost all these relationships. I think the thing for me that maybe I feel such shame that I didn't leave sooner. And I look at people like you and I'm like, oh, she was so much stronger than me because she had the guts to leave. And I was always like in and out, like fringy and then deep in because I couldn't handle the rejection. I wanted to be included so badly. And so I gave up parts of myself, who I really was, in order to be a part. And so that's where I feel like I look at people like you and I compare myself. And I think, that like, I admire that quality. But you're right. We've all suffered, like, no matter which way, especially being born and raised in it. It's no wonder, like, a fish doesn't know it's swimming in water. We didn't know any different. So, like, of course, we didn't realize how deeply it affected us. That's all we knew.
Yeah. So I teach college chemistry, and I say this to my students all the time. I say, do you think that fish know that they're swimming in water? And they're like, what? Like, that's a weird question. And I'm like, just think about it. Do you think that the fish knows? And they're like, why are you talking about fish? And I'm like, because you as a human are literally swimming in a sea of gases that you don't see, that you don't perceive, that you are literally going into your body that keep you alive and sustain you. And you don't ever perceive it or interact with it. And they're like, oh my God, the fish doesn't know they're in water. And I'm like, that's right.
That's right.
It's like what you're saying. We didn't know that it was toxic and horrific, and every part of it was grooming. I mean, every single part of it was grooming. That's what I just keep coming back to. There was no part of it that was not grooming.
That's
and
so
it makes me really angry.
Yeah.
When I think about it now.
It's what you said too about like not knowing. We hear that all the time, and from ourselves included, like didn't know what other people were going through. You think you're the only one because they siloed us. They did that on purpose. Yeah. So you would feel alone, and like the only way to survive is to be a part of the tribe, and these are the rules. This is what you have to do to be a part.
Yeah. And they told you that the way to goodness and acceptance in God was through your actions and your behavior. But you couldn't actually behave your way to success in that community. You had to be chosen, and then you had to submit to the every desire and will of an individual. And so you were sort of caught in this impossible, fucked up scenario where you were trying to, and then they were also saying it's not performance, it's love, but you have to act this way and that way. And then you did. And then they would be like, you're doing it wrong. And you're like, I swear that's what you said. And that was part of it for me. And I'll say this, knowing a lot about neurodivergence, I am sure that I have some amount of neurodivergence that just can't tolerate like hypocrisy to this day. Like if you say something and then you do the opposite, I'm going to be like, ding dong. It's just that, and not even like judgy or like, how dare you, like angry, but like, sorry, what happened there? And I did that all the time in San Diego. I mean, endlessly.
And I'm sure that got you in plenty of trouble. They're like, how dare you question anything we say?
Well, the best part is, and I think I said this in some email, they were always courting me. I mean, they wanted me to be in leadership so bad. And I would be like, okay. And I'd show up, and then I would be like, the fuck? And afterwards I would be like, we need to chat. And I would be like, it's just that you said, and then that happened. And they would be like, then I would stop getting invited. And then, you know, a few months would go by, and they would be like, wait,
hey, you have an actual opinion and a voice? No, you're not cut out for leadership.
I remember once being in the taco shell with the main, you know, San Diego guy, the guy that you think of that is like, he is San Diego. And we had all of like the youth leadership, right? And many of whom went on to be pastors and, you know, leaders in the greater church. And his whole like sermon to us that night, and it was just like maybe 10 of us or 8 of us or something. His whole sermon was that it's good to be good and goodness is good. And I was like, okay. And he was talking about like,
mind blowing.
But he was talking about like purity and righteousness. And so I was like, okay, yeah. And I'm looking at all my peers in the room, right? And so we adjourn, and I'm like, hey, can we just chat for a sec? And he's like, sure. And I'm like, what do you mean, like, it's good to be good and purity is good? And why did you invite all of us then? Because he's fucking her and she's trying to fuck that guy. Like, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, if this is like the purity and the righteousness and the goodness, like, what? I can't reconcile what you're saying. And he was like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like,
they don't have the answers to people who ask real questions.
And I'm not judging. We were all at this point, like between 18 and 22. Like this was the time you should be having sex. But like the word was like purity. And I was like, are you pretending or are you unaware?
Because were they all sitting there nodding their heads like, oh yeah. Meanwhile, I'm like fucking this guy in the
And it wasn't like, even in that moment, I wasn't like trying to throw them under the bus. I just couldn't reconcile what he was saying with what was happening. And anyways, I didn't get invited back for a while.
I love it. I'm so enjoying this already off the bat. I want to just rewind and give a little bit of like context for Rebecca. You grew up in the San Diego church, right? And you were No. Okay.
No, I was
I
born
remember like your family, my family and your family were in Shiloh together at the same time at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was born in Anaheim, and whatever
We
church.
were too, me and Scott.
Yeah. Apparently that was the place to be born in the late 70s, early 80s. So I was born in Anaheim. And then when I was 3, my parents moved to Shiloh, and I did the Shiloh Kingdom School there from, I don't know, until like 4th grade or something. And then my parents moved to Minnesota. And so then I was in Minnesota for like the next, I don't know, 5 or 6 years with, you know, the Lazinskis and all of those guys. Like I grew up with those guys. And then when I was 14, I moved to San Diego without my family. Sort of had my own meeting with God, because my family was like always in and out and in and out. And I was just born in it like most of us were. So I was like, I don't know, sometimes we go to church, sometimes we don't.
Can you explain how did you end up at 14 moving from the Midwest to San Diego? What was the plan?
I was getting in a lot of trouble at 14. I mean, just my home life was really unstable. I think my parents were probably playing out the trauma of their own life experience with never feeling accepted in the church. And it was very chaotic. And my response to that level of chaos in my life was to make it worse. Just by absolutely being like, I'm not okay. And, you know, just being as rebellious as any teenager. I have 2 teenage daughters and a preteen at the moment. And I'm like, oh God, these girls are so good. Like if they had any idea what I was like, you know, at their age, they can never know. But so my parents sent me to like spend 2 weeks with my aunt who was in the San Diego church. Not for the church, but just like to go see family. And so my aunt was like, hey, cool, you're going to come to church with us every day of the week for these 2 weeks that you're with us. And I was like, this is hell. I hate this. I wore like dark eyeliner and I was smoking cigarettes like outside the church. And I was just in like full rebellion mode. And they were getting ready for this weird Brazil church to come to San Diego. And it was like the world had stopped to prepare for this like Brazil visit. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. But so I had no choice. Like she literally would drop us off at 9 a.m. and we would be there till sometimes 10 p.m. So I spent 2 weeks, like 24 hours a day around these San Diego church kids. And they were, you know, nice or whatever. I think they thought I was wild. Like they were like, what is that? But in that time, the Brazil church did come and I met the leader of the Brazil church at that time. And I don't know. I've thought a lot about this, but because I always thought of this as a meeting with God. But now that I'm going back and sort of redefining everything, I was like, oh, I just needed someone to love me and tell me I was okay. And he did that in that moment when he first met me. And it just sort of broke me in a good way. And I called my parents and said, hey, I'm going to stay for the summer. And they were like, that's fine, because you're probably not going to survive if you come back here. And so I stayed for the summer, and then I called at the end of the summer and said, hey, I'm going to stay for the school year, because the San Diego had the church school. And they were like, cool. But by that time, my aunt, who was not super stable human and had lots of trauma and chaos in her life, basically just said, you can't stay here. Like, this isn't working. So one of the church families just took me in, and my parents were not stable or really like in control of their own lives at that point. So they never sent any money. Like this church family who I really think back, and they were really just good to me on levels that they shouldn't have even been. But they took me in, and I had to go through a couple church families, but I landed with one that I stayed with through high school and just lived with them essentially for free. Like my parents didn't support them in any way. I don't think that they could. And I graduated from the church school. And
what was that experience like as a teenager in San Diego? Because that was like kind of known as one of the more conservative of the fellowship.
Yeah, it definitely was, you know, like the goody two-shoe vibes that it had the, you know, reputation of being. I definitely never saw any of the abuse that has, since come out. Like, I never saw or witnessed or experienced any like physical or sexual abuse myself. Because the whole world would have known if I would have seen it or known about it.
This is probably why you didn't see it, because they knew that.
Probably. That's the thing. I could totally have seen myself being abused, but everyone would have known about it afterwards. And I'm sure that there was some thought behind, how victims were chosen. But yeah, and this was, I think, a little bit different for me because I had this sort of like come to Jesus moment myself at 14 that was really different from being born into it. And so at that age, this was now my walk with God and like my church, like, because my parents weren't even in the church at that time. And so I was really like, I thought that we really were going to walk with God and change the world and that see Jesus come back. Like, I really, truly thought that. And so for me, it was a little bit different because I wasn't there at that age just because I had grown up and this was my community and it was all that I knew. I was sort of choosing it. Mm-hmm. So there were probably times I was a little, like religious and difficult to be around. I know that my girls at that age think that they have the whole world figured out. And I'm sure that I did too at that age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that started with that, like meeting with that kind of the Brazilian leader kind of kicked that off for you. San Diego was very like, I think in my perspective of it, like kind of, and you tell me what, if I'm wrong about this, but like it was very like Brazil adjacent in terms of like energy and
involvement,
commitment to involvement. Like they really like had like this like real, like, and it was very youthful in a lot of ways. There were a lot of like young people there that kind of gave it that energy.
And our like youth group was also, they were largely very dedicated to the community and their walk with God. Like these were into it young people. That was definitely like sort of the vibe of San Diego. I don't know if you mind if I jump forward a couple decades,
Please.
But in 2016, and we can talk about how this happened because I had not been a part of the church for a long time before this. But in 2016, I visited Shiloh for one of the very last, I think, like School of Prophets. And I took my kids and I ran into that same Brazil leader and he met my oldest daughter. So she's now 16. So I don't know. She was probably like 10-ish, 8-ish, something like that. And I remember he stood up and he saw me and he gave me a big hug. And then he like moved from me to her and he was just like laser focused on her. And he just kept saying like, you're so beautiful. And she is. I mean, she's like shockingly beautiful. Like since she was a little kid, people will come up and be weird with me about how beautiful she is. But he like had her and he was like everyone else in the room was dead to him. And he just kept saying like, you're so beautiful. Like, you're
That's
so
creepy.
Beautiful. I was like, okay, like, thanks, good. Like, mom, all of my,
red flag,
like,
red flag.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I am uncomfortable with this. And I definitely remember, like, rationalizing what he was probably doing because somebody once told me, JRS said that with young girls, you have to tell them how beautiful they are or else they'll look for this validation from men. And I definitely was, like, incredibly uncomfortable. I interrupted this weird interaction. And then I rationalized that, he's a really good person and it couldn't possibly be as weird as it felt. But if I now rewind back to my thing, it was very similar. Like he singled me out. It was like direct eye to eye contact. And but instead of saying you're so beautiful, he was like, I love you. Like, I love you. And he just kept like repeating that. And that was like a really trippy, like, me as a young teenager versus like my own kid as
it was love bombing you both. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. You're almost like getting to see your own experience. Like you saw it through your eyes as a teen and then you like time travel and now you're like looking in third person at the same interaction and the same guy doing this thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's what a lot of that they were trying to, that's what that love bombing thing is. That's what it's, it's get these
It's
people
grooming
attached.
Yes.
Exactly.
They prey on your need to be, or everyone desires to feel loved or to feel beautiful or to feel accepted, especially when you're like deprived of it, which is what they would do in the cult a lot. And some of our, in our families of origin where we were neglected. And so then you have someone like him, because he did the same thing with me. He was one of the people that was like, well, at least he loves me, because I always felt like a black sheep too, and I could never do anything right. But he was always so loving and so kind. And now I look back and I'm like, was he this way with young men? Because I feel like it was all
Never
he
did
just
it to
surrounded.
me. I don't,
See, I mean, he did that with pretty young women. And now some people have come out and said that, you know, he was not the nice guy that we all thought he was.
And and to add to that too, like your experience, Charity, you've said where it's like you get that at first, and then once he has you and you're like living on the compound in Brazil and trapped there, ignored completely.
Ignored the entire time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but that was definitely the culture, is you were ignored, even if you were doing everything that you were supposed to do, because they always had to have the carrot of, well, if you do what I want, then I'll accept you and you'll come in deeper. But that was that same, like I said at the beginning, like this cycle where they would say that it's like behavior and action is what we're aiming for, but then you could not behave your way into success.
Yeah, it was an unattainable goal.
And that's the thing is like, that's what keeps you. And I think like what you were saying at the beginning too, which I really loved, is like everybody was surviving, and that loss of community or not being accepted by community is one of the most devastating things. It's like family and then community. And a lot of people already had trouble in their family, and then to lose a community. And that's why a lot of people that left early, left late, left whenever, they have this experience of like trying to regenerate themselves. It's this really difficult thing to get over. But the people that stayed in were also trying to survive by being accepted by the community and trying to conform the impossible conformity that you could never land in the right spot. And really the only people that like thrived were the ones that disregarded the rules. And the only rule was absolute submission and selfish submission to the one person, Marilyn or whoever at the very top of them, and then selfishness for themselves and like achieving or whatever. And I'm talking about like leadership who like work their way up to like success within the community.
Yeah.
Everybody else was trying to like, you know, either genuinely or ingenuinely or whatever, just live in the community and be accepted. And all of that is like the struggle.
Well, and the only difference between my experience with him and my daughters, because they were like almost like, I mean, like movie scenes recreate, like when you like remake a movie, but with new actors. The difference was she had me there to be like, this is weird. I'm going to interrupt this. I don't like it. I'm uncomfortable. But not only did I not have anyone saying that, they were like, this is one of the greatest men of God that we know. Like anything this man says is like God speaking directly to you. And so for me, not only did I not have anyone saying, well, let's be cautious with this, you know, way older man, like your dad's age man being this interested in you and this much eye contact, right? But I was told to revere what he thought and listen to what he thought and submit to what he thought and said. And I know that, Charity, you've talked about sort of the dangers of, you know, how even Gary and Marilyn talked about sex. I watched your guys' the super weird, you know, the singles.
Gary and Marilyn talked to the singles,
and how basically saying that sex is intercession and the highest form of intercession is such a slippery slope into, well, now Rick can, you know, ask you to intercede for Mama and Papa.
Or Gary and Marilyn themselves. You want to intercede with us? Like, Yeah. So anyways, and I know, Charity, you've talked a lot about just about like where our parents' generation was in protecting all of us. And I think that, and this is not in any way excusing them, because I could never do it. But I just think that they thought that these people really were God. Like, I think that like they were almost like, many of them anyway, it's like true believers. Like you could never have convinced them that they weren't doing the right thing by telling you to
in every way give yourself to these men.
It's true. It's either that or that, like, I know my mother has said she felt at many times like questioning some things that were going on with regard to me, but she didn't trust herself enough. She thought, well, they know better because they're God, and so she just shut it down, all those feelings.
Yes. And that's one of the strongest things that I took away from watching. And I've listened to some of the other podcast, the Snapping Out of It podcast.
Our friends.
Yeah. And one of the biggest takeaway messages from all of this has just been the grooming, because I don't know if I was ever being, sexually groomed, but I was certainly being groomed to not trust my own instincts. That was the overwhelming thing that I left the church with, was not being able to trust myself, because not only every time I had an instinct and I shared it, because I was a big communicator. So my shepherds heard everything. I wasn't like, oh, please let me. And then they said no. And I would be like, okay. But I told them every thought I had. I told them everything I wanted to do. I was very invested in, sharing. And it was always like, no, you're wrong. Your instincts are wrong. You're wrong. Don't trust yourself. We have to tell you. And they always told me the opposite of what I thought was right.
Yeah.
And they would blame us for things, right? I was thinking about a family that I was very, very, very close to in the San Diego church. And there was two families that I was super close to in the San Diego church. And really cool people overall. And the one family I was living with around the time that I was I think I'm leaving. And they were like, well, hang out with us. They weren't telling me not to leave, but they were letting me not have to be in church all the time to see if I might recover. I never did. But
thank God.
They had said, hey, come to this Shabbat at the other family's house that I really love. They're having a Shabbat tonight, so come with us. And I was like, okay, that's not really what I wanted to do on my Friday night, but I was like, sure, I'll come. And so I met them there, and out front of the house that we were going to, they were like, by the way, we have a new shepherd, we do, and it's one of your peers, my peers, so same age. And this was a mean girl. And this person knows who she is. We have over the years made up and hashed it out, and I love her now. But this was a mean girl back in the day. And I was like, okay, I'm uncomfortable. But I was like, but as long as you guys aren't sharing my life with her, you guys can do you. And they were like, well, you know how this works. If you tell us stuff, we're going to tell her. And I was like, well, fuck you then. And they were like, okay, calm down. And so we went into the Shabbat, and I'm sitting at the table, and I'm having what I think, looking back, was probably a light panic attack. And I'm getting more upset and more agitated, the more I think of it. And they're all doing Shabbat stuff. And I got up and just walked the fuck out of the Shabbat, because I was going to lose it, throw bread at somebody and bail.
That's part of the Shabbat, actually. You're supposed to throw bread. So
the next day, the family who, not that hosted the Shabbat, but, the ones who said, we have a new shepherd and we're going to tell her all about your life, called me. And they were like, the family who's hosting, they're really upset that you made a scene and laughed. And by the way, I didn't make a scene. I just was agitated.
You did the old Irish goodbye.
I was like, I'm out. So they were like, they're really upset that you did that. And, and they were starting to chastise me and tell me how wrong I was. And I was like, let me stop you there. You know how I feel about her. You know how I feel about this. If you wanted me to sit calmly through that Shabbat, my recommendation was not drop a bomb on me the second before we go in. And they were like, well, that's true. But they wanted to blame me.
They wanted you to be wrong.
Yeah. The whole thing was me. And I was like, no, you. And
good for you.
Wow. Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, speaking of the thing you were talking about with the inability to trust yourself because they made us doubt so much our own intuition, our own instincts. You had mentioned your dating experience and how that exacerbated that notion, right?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. The family that hosted that Shabbat that I got in trouble for leaving was the family of the guy that I was dating in like high school, college. I don't know. What's super weird to me is that I can't remember any timelines. Like I've tried so hard to be like, how old was I? How long did various things like last? And I'll think I have it figured out, but then I'll remember something that like nails down like a concrete like age or time. And I'm like all wrong. And I find that to be weird.
Is it related to trauma? Because I have heard, trauma brain, it's like memories are sort of like timelines is blurred.
Weird to me that I can't remember like ages that I was or duration of things. And that to me is very strange. But anyways, so when I was in high school, there was a guy that we all went to church with that was like the guy that everyone wanted. Like, I mean, he was lusted after by the girls in the church. He was the sweetest guy. He used to get like catcalled because we would do some classes.
He was cute. I remember.
and so not like the type of guy that wanted that type of attention, and we were good friends. And so we always had our church proms. I mean, they were school proms, but they happened in the sanctuary and only with church people. So let's call them church proms.
Does your church have a prom? Not as cool as ours.
And we were required to go. It wasn't optional.
Mandatory prom for all.
And you went every year that you were in the school because otherwise there was nobody.
There wasn't enough people. Yeah.
So I don't remember. This was, I don't know what year. This is what I'm sorting out. I can't remember, but some year in high school, sophomore, maybe junior year. I don't know. Anyways, this guy, we were down by the snack bar and I came around the corner and he was there and he was like, hey, I want to ask you something. Like, do you want to go to the prom? And I was like, oh, no. No, thank you. But not like, I just didn't ever consider him romantically, right? Like, I was like, oh, that's like really nice. Like, you're such a lovely human, like such a good friend, such an amazing guy, but like, no, thank you. And he's like, oh, okay. And that was it. And I was like, well, whatever. And I never even thought about it again until a few days later, our youth pastor and what was she? I guess she was over at the school. She was an older woman who was big in leadership at the church, and was, I don't know if she was formally over the school or just sort of unofficially, I don't know. But the two of them decided that they would be assigning prom dates that year and that everyone had to go and that you had to go with the person that they picked for you. And so I found out because they were like, hey, by the way, your date is the guy you just rejected 2 days ago. And I was like, are you sure? Like, this feels very awkward.
More awkward for him, right? He's like, now she's being forced to go with me after she turned me down. Like, Jesus. Poor guy.
Yes. And he was a little bit younger than me and his brother was in my like high school class. And I don't know, whatever. And so I was upset and it was weird, but we were always upset and it was always weird. And yet things moved forward the way that they wanted it to. Like,
yeah.
So well put.
It's so strange that like I always wonder that, like, you asked that question, like the thing of they set up, you turned him down, but then they're like, no, you guys should go together. And like, what is their thinking in that? Did they not know? Was it like a random thing? Or was there like...
It was definitely not random. I don't know. They wanted us to date because then where this all leads to is we went to prom and we had a blast. Like, it was really fun. He was always a fun guy to hang out with. And they just kept giving us sort of positive feedback and like positive, like, like pushing and manipulating so that we would date. And we did. And we ended up dating for a while. Again, I cannot for the life of me now figure out how long it was, but I think we ended up going to 3 proms together, but It doesn't seem like we dated for that long. I don't understand what was happening in that time frame, but we did it. And eventually, like, again, he just wasn't really my type. Like, I am an academic and I always was. And that's not his vibe, right? Like, which is totally fine. But I liked like the nerdy, smart guys that were like reading a book in the corner. Like, that's who I wanted to go to the prom with. So anyways, they were like, no, you're going. And they just kept sort of engineering it so that we would date. And we did date for a while. And I ended up really, liking him and caring about him. And anyone would have. I mean, he was the best, especially at that age, just the best boyfriend that any, teenage girl could have had. Really respectful and kind and sweet and caring and all of those things. And so around the time where I was like, well, okay. And everyone would talk about how we were going to get married. And I was like, okay, like definitely just think we had fundamentally different worldviews, which I think is why initially I just wasn't even like, it had never occurred to me to be interested, but you just get worn down. Right. And I was like, okay, like, I guess. And I loved his family. Like they were like my family. And I think more than all of that, the church leadership liked it. And so now I was belonging. And I was finding success on some level, and I was incorporated as someone that was doing the right stuff and being cared about and, being respected. And I liked all of that. I mean, that was what we were all so desperate for, was to feel like we belonged and were loved and were successful and valuable. And I felt like that, not even because of him, but because the church leadership liked the relationship so much. And so around the time that I was like, okay, maybe I can do this with this guy. We were so young, though, like so young. Then they were like, you know what? The youth pastor came and he's like, you guys need to go on a break. And I was like, the what now? And he's like, yeah, no, like you guys can't talk to each other. You can't see each other. Like, no, no, nothing. And I was like, it was such a mind fuck for me, because I was like, okay, because I wanted to continue being obedient and, successful because I was doing all the right things, but it was also very confusing. And then, we were always together. So it like you couldn't escape each other. So we were just like at every Bible study together, at every work day together, at the youth pastor's house together, which is a hard scenario for teenagers who are breaking up. To be going
who
through.
Didn't necessarily want to break up, but just like the leaders told them to break up, and then now you're having to do it. It's so interesting. I just don't I still don't understand, other than the broad idea of like, why were they always assigning people to be in relationships together and then breaking them up? It's like the assigning, it feels like it makes sense. It's like, oh, you're kind of like, we could lose her, so let's make sure she's in a relationship with somebody and that will keep her around. But then like, why break you? Split you up.
Did they give you a reason?
Yeah, it's like,
no. And I have no idea. For all I know, maybe he wanted to break up and they just never told. Like, I have no idea. One day they were just like, you guys can't, like, you're on a break now and that's it. But the worst part, so I remember being like, well, but can I still go to his parents' house? And they were like, no. And I was like, they're like my family. And, I was this whole time not with my family. I had moved to San Diego alone, and I was a little bit older now, but I was still essentially like an orphan, and they were my like adopted family. And I would babysit his younger sisters all the time. And again, like his brother was in my grade, like just my whole world was connected to their family, his family. And I was like, well, that's fine. Like, I can not date him, but like, I can still go like talk with his parents, because that was a big part of my daily life, and they were like, no. And I was like melting down, and they were like, well, but what's wrong with you? Like, why is this so hard for you? What kind of bonds did you guys make? Did you guys have sex? You must be having sex. We didn't. But they were like, the bonds like this, like you definitely were having sex and we told you not to. And I was like, we didn't even have sex. Like,
oh my God, that's so frustrating.
But it was a really devastating time for me. But also, and this is so weird because I remember being really emotionally distraught, but the number one feeling was also relief. because I didn't actually want to end up with him. Like, not because he is not just a phenomenal human being, but he wasn't my person.
Wasn't right
you know?
for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and I knew that. I always knew that from the very beginning. And so I remember being like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't have to, we're not going to get married, but also being like, just so much internal turmoil because I was like, but they said that we were supposed to, and did I just ruin this, or was it meant to be? And now it's like just chaos internally for me.
Did you feel like you had done something wrong and like that's why they split you up, or what were those thoughts?
I don't remember. I do know that like, because they were just so weird about the physical relationship. I remember once, and I think at that age, and we were so young, but he was definitely sort of more religious about those types of things than I was. But we were literally like 3 days a week in church service together, right? And we would sit together, and that was a big deal. And I remember one day like rubbing his back, like just like, I don't know what I was thinking.
Sinful.
You Jezebel.
After church, he was like, that was really inappropriate. Like, it made me think about like things I did not want to think about, like while I was in church. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sorry.
Wow.
No, that makes sense. I would have been the same way actually as like a teenager in church. I would have been like, oh, Jesus is looking, please, no physical contact.
Think on sexy thoughts. Think on sexy thoughts.
Well, and one thing for me that I think was really damaging is I am a really physical person. Like I touch people that I care about, like all the time. Like if we're close and you're talking to me, I'm going to touch your arm. I just touch people.
You're
and so
affectionate,
feeling like that was fundamentally like gross and bad was something that took me years to sort of unpack for myself, because those were all of my instincts, but they said, this is all wrong. Like, you should never touch someone's back in church.
Right. All that stuff about your like instincts and like how you knew from the beginning, you actually had it all figured out. And then they took you on this roller coaster.
Yes.
How does that affect you going forward in your life? Like, did you see anything?
Absolutely. So my life is really great. And a lot of what I went through has turned into some really powerfully positive, like, aspects of my person that probably wouldn't be as emphasized as they are if I didn't grow up the way that I did. So ultimately our journey, it is what it is. But the one thing that has just consistently been just a fucking mess in my life is romantic relationships, and really being in horrible, like with horrible narcissistic men, romantic relationships. And I have gone to therapy for years about it. And I remember talking to this one therapist, and she was so amazing. But I was just like, what's wrong with me? Like, why do I always pick these horrible humans that just turn out to like essentially be monsters? And she said, no, you're not picking them. They're picking you because you've already been groomed. You're like literally perfection. You're super comfortable with toxicity. You are totally conditioned to want to fix even things that are unfixable and behaviors that are unacceptable. And you're incredibly empathetic. Like, she is like you. They are picking you because they know what they need. And you're exactly the profile that a narcissist is looking for. And I was like, well, fuck you, Gary, JRS, all you fuckers who taught me to be that way. Yeah. And I would, over the years, talk with her and be like, oh, you'd be so proud of me. This happened. And it was like with somebody I was dating. And I was like, you can't do that to me. Like, I know. And I stood up for myself, and then we talked it out, and I was like, that's a boundary. And he was like, okay. And I was like, yeah, good job. And she was like, yeah, that's good. I'm glad that, you're standing up for yourself. But she goes, here's how I'll know that you're healed. She said, a healthy woman would never entertain that type of behavior, like a toxic behavior. And if you were whole and healthy internally, you would be like, this is a problem. And you would walk away, and that would be that. You would not be staying saying what your boundaries are, trying to convince that person to treat you better, and being proud of yourself for doing all of that. And so she's like, you're making progress, but this is not what someone who's whole and healthy inside, not how they would respond to it. And I was like, oh my God, like, fuck. Because even after years of therapy and so many experiences, I still do it. Like to this day, I'm still like, okay, I can fix this. Like, well, I'm going to tell you my boundaries, like in all relationships. And it just makes me really sick. Like it makes me feel nauseous thinking about it.
If it makes you feel any better, I go through the same thing. And I think that as with being women, especially, we're already conditioned by society to put up with a lot of shit. So we'll be chosen because our survival used to depend on it. But I do the same thing. And it's like, I am almost more comfortable with toxic behavior. I don't know how to handle.
Familiar.
It's familiar. Yeah. And it's that like, I'm desperate to be chosen and loved. And I think that if I don't put up with bullshit, this is the last person on earth that's going to want to be with me. So if I don't put up with that, there's nobody else. And this is like, I deserve to be treated like this. It's like devastating. I mean, it's one thing when you like start to see it in yourself. It's harder to be objective with one's own experience. But then when I hear it from other women, especially, and the men too, I mean, Scott and I talk about this too. We've both had like issues with relationships because of how we were raised. And it's heartbreaking to me. We didn't stand a fucking chance.
No, we didn't.
We were told we couldn't have our own needs. We couldn't voice our needs, our wants, our desires, that all our worth was based on if we were pleasing to somebody else. We were supposed to take whatever abuse we got and say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. And this is all in the name of like discipline and walking with God. But the whole thing with like empaths, like, narcissists seek out empaths. And it's not like narcissists seek out people who they perceive as weak. They love to seek out people who they know are strong.
Yep.
It's so bizarre to me. But I've been like a semi-narcissist magnet in the past too, with friends and like romantic partners. It's a miracle. Like I married a wonderful man. He's not a narcissist. I just want to, and like we're divorced, but it's not because he's a narcissist. I just want to put that out there. But like some similar, I've seen these patterns play out in my life again and again and again, and mostly in romantic relationships.
Yeah. Same girl. Same.
That thing you said about setting the boundaries, like your therapist called you out on, basically, of that, like that is so interesting because you're like still putting effort into a relationship where at the end of the day, he's always going to expect that type of person is always going to expect that you conform to their way of living. Even if like you show up and you're like, we can fix this house that is literally on fire and falling down. If we just set up a wall here and a wall here and we do all this, it's like, no, just walk away, get a new friggin' house, man. And
it feels impossible.
It does.
Like she's saying, like anybody that has that pattern built into them, like we were given in the Living Word, the way that relationships were controlled and the way that they expected you to behave in relationships, men and women in different ways, definitely from what we see with like women and all the patterns that they were having you guys go through, but that grooming of the expectations of the way that you're supposed to engage in a relationship, trained you, like you're saying, for certain types of people, and those certain types, like puzzle pieces that like fit together, and you're just like, gross, this isn't the puzzle piece I want it to be, you know? And other people that have that pattern early on of like good relationships and healthy like self-love and all of that stuff wouldn't even notice the narcissist. They'd see somebody be like, oh, and just go the other way. Like it would be a very minimal contact with those
exactly
people.
What my therapist said. She just said healthy, whole women just don't it would never even be entertained. The second it popped up, it would be so unfamiliar and so grotesque that they would not be able to not shy away from it. Right. And I was like, well, fuck me.
But that's amazing that like, that my therapist says that too. Well, knowing is like half of the battle. Like once you're aware of it, then you stand a chance,
Yeah. Yes.
But that makes me, so would you be willing to talk about, you mentioned you had a very difficult experience with your ex-husband and how a shepherd that you appealed to Very much mishandled the situation.
Before I tell that story, though, I do want to say that because of my experience and because I'm raising 3 daughters, my daughters are absolutely feral. They don't find any desire to be the pleaser in the room. If they think you're gross, they're going to be like, I don't think so.
See you never.
I have to be like, occasionally be like, okay, really? Just a little bit. Like, it is good to be kind to the people around you. But I also give them the space because we never got this, and humans need practice, but we never got to practice advocating for ourselves, right? So, I will, if my oldest daughter in particular, because she's a junior in high school. So, she's got like her own whole life going on. And if there's things that are going on at her school, say with a teacher or an advisor of some sort, and she'll come home and I'll be like, like that is not okay. I'll be like, okay, I'll give her tips and things I think and things to do, and even offer her ways to sort of anchor her arguments. And then I let her go advocate for herself. But on the backside, I email the principal and I'm like, hi, I'm watching. I'm giving her the space to advocate for herself, but know that if she feels like it's not working, I'm going to jump in. And they don't like when I jump in because things go down. But he's told me before, even though I think they're generally terrified of me, he's like, I hope to raise my daughter the way that you do, like giving them space to advocate for themselves and giving them that practice. And I know she is in ASB, which is like student leadership for high school. And she's had some issues with her advisor of ASB. And there were times where she was so frustrated with how he was behaving and how wrong she felt it. She was like, I'm going to quit. And I'm like, okay, you can quit if you're not in crisis mode and if you really decide you don't want to be an ASB. But I'm like, but if you're someone who's seeing a problem and you're willing to talk about it, you need to stay and see the problem through and expose it and discuss it because you're helping everyone else who's also stuck in that same community. And I was like, so you don't get to walk away because it's hard. I'm here to support you to make sure that ultimately you're okay, but you must talk about things that are wrong when you see them. And so she did, and she ended up staying through that process. And it was, time, but can you imagine how cool we would have all been?
Oh my God, yes.
Right?
If we'd have been allowed to.
Yes, and had learned how to, in functional, healthy ways, advocate for ourselves and each other. And if that was something that had been valued instead of sort of crushed. But anyway.
Well, that's what I want to say about, like, I've been seeing, even just when you were talking about the Brazil leader and the time travel-y situation and this, and it's just like we're getting like a micro masterclass of breaking generational trauma.
Yeah,
and like stopping it, like not passing this on to the next generation. Let's do something different. I think it's really amazing. Really amazing. I'd love to even hear more about it, but I want to make sure we get the context too.
Yes.
So let's get over to that.
My girls are amazing. They're a little bit terrifying, but they're amazing. So back to so I had, after the breakup and all of that, I never really fully recovered. Like that was all just so weird for me and just so bizarre. And I was so emotionally distraught and confused and relieved. And I just was like, and I was also a freshman around that time at UCSD, which was a really tough school, especially coming out of Centers of Learning by the sea.
We've established it wasn't the best education.
It was a pretty brutal wake-up call. And, neither of my parents had college degrees, so I was really doing this on my own. And I don't know. I mean, now I know that, better even than academic is I'm a learner. Like I just could never, if I had time and money, I would go back and get more doctoral degrees just to know things about things because I just love it. Like I'm a great consumer of information. I just find it fascinating to learn deeply about things. So I didn't really understand that about myself then, but I knew that I had to succeed at this degree. And I was failing that freshman year of trying to, because, the church was like, you can't live there. you have to commute 45 minutes each way, and I didn't have a car, so I had to catch rides with other church people that were going. I mean, I don't know how I didn't drop out that first year. And they were like, don't stay there, and just like, keep your head down, go to your classes, and then come immediately back and do the work days and do the work nights and be at church all the time. And I was like, I started with C's, and then there were D's. And by the end of my freshman year, I had some F's, and I was like, oh my God, like it was so important to me to be successful. So with all that was going on with the breakup and it not going well at college for me, but how much that was important to me, I just started being a college student, and more just sort of started distancing myself from the church, but not even like super intentionally, just like I didn't have time. And I wanted to be successful. And then it gets weird, right? You can't really hang out with those people and be in those spaces if you're not. So I moved out of the family's house that I was living with, and, just got an apartment with some random dude, whose cat peed all over all of my textbooks.
Cats be like that.
I just moved out and was like, I have to be a college student. Okay. So I peripherally always stayed close-ish with people. Like, I was never like, I hate you all, like, fuck you. I was like, oh, hey, guys. Sometimes they were like, like, I remember running into people at the mall and then being like, like, going the other way, right? And I was like, okay,
oh, my God.
Cool.
It's like if you left the church, then you were suddenly, like, damaged goods, and you would contaminate people, like, if they interacted with you. Transference.
Yes. But I don't know why.
I wonder if what they were saying behind your back, because that's what, like, learn is that, like, there's all sorts of, like, misinformation and bad shit said behind people's backs when they left.
Totally. Yeah. But for whatever reason, that never, like, I did never take it super personally. Like, so if church people are around, I was always happy to say hi. We would every once in a while go to the church. Like, so it was never like an adversarial relationship, but I was like, not even fringe. Like, I was like on a different planet, but I would wave, sometimes. So anyways, I went to grad school. I got married. I started having kids, and we had moved to Washington, D.C. area. And we went to a local church that was also super fucked up. Fuck.
Was this a Living Word church or different? Oh,
no,
okay.
Just like an individual local church. And it was like a nightmare. All the same things that were happening in the Living Word, but also like special investigators investigating whether there was child.
This is that same thing of like relationships. Like, how do you always ask that question? Like, why? Like, people are always like wonder, like, oh, you go from like, and I know you're going to tell us a little bit about like family members that are like one cult to the next cult to the next cult, et cetera. It's you go from like, okay, I'm out of this. I'm like not really involved in this church anymore. Let's go find another church. You go there and it's like, oh, special investigators are checking around for sexual child abuse,
Yeah.
Like it's the same. It's the same thing.
It's the same.
Yeah.
We went, and it was very much like a traditional church. And I kind of just dug that because the Living Word was so like, oh, we're not traditional, but it was also evil. So I was like, well, maybe like these more old school, like traditional church guys, like maybe it's not as bad as Gary said it was. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed it for a little while. But there was a pastor there who all the moms talked about. And some of the dads were like, our kids cannot be alone with that man. Like, if you have him over. But it was like weird because everyone talked about it, but it was also like, no
one did anything about it.
He's just a weird guy. And so
it's never just a weird guy. It's
always just a weird guy. Yeah. So during this time, my then husband, it turned out, had been sleeping with prostitutes, like so many that there was like not a count. And I was like, what? Because I accidentally found out, and I was like 8.5 months pregnant with my third kid.
Oh my God, Rebecca.
And we had just moved to the East Coast like that year. So I didn't have family. I was still, establishing deeper friendships and a community. And so it started falling apart, the marriage, obviously, that as it does when you find out that you are
They're sleeping with sex workers.
They're sex workers and a pathological liar. And this guy who was part of the church leadership, So anyways, one day I was in trauma mode. I was getting divorced. I was trying to figure out what to do. My ex-mother-in-law is a divorce attorney, and she just made my life a living hell. Never marry the son of a divorce attorney.
Yeah.
So I was in like full trauma mode. And this one day I get this phone call, and we're going to get to the Living Word, but this is how I ended up back at the Living Word, is this story. I answered the phone, and this guy's like, hey, this is special investigator such and such. And, you know, I want to talk to you about, you know, the church and the sky. And I was just like, fuck off, man. Like, I'm out of here. I'm moving back to California. Like, leave me alone. I can't. Like, I was at like,
I'm already like at capacity.
Yeah, I was drowning already. So I was like, no, thanks. Like, wrong number. Click. So I did not know, but in basically saying, I can't, I don't want to talk to you or whatever, just I am overwhelmed. He decided I was a suspect. Like, I must be either a part of the issue. And I mean, you have to think of from his perspective, he's trying to investigate a church community where there is potentially like pedophilia going on. And me being like, I'm not going to talk to you. That wasn't how I saw it, but you know. So, and I didn't know this at the time, but so he continues to pursue me and basically lets me know at some point that it's not optional, that I'm going to, you know, interact with him. And I was like, oh, this is not, I don't know what I thought this was, but this is serious. So we spend about 6 months together, and I tell him the whole story. I have all of these, I am nothing if not persistent and tenacious. And so I had been reaching out to the church leadership about this for a long time in emails that repeatedly. I gave him like a giant file of here's what I know and here's what I've done. And we met and talked and interviewed and all this stuff. And at the end, he's like, holy shit. Like, God bless the person that ever goes against you. He was like, you basically had already built the case for me before I ever showed up.
Fantastic.
And he's like, sorry, like, I thought you were a suspect. And I'm like, I was just so overwhelmed. Like, I could not even fathom taking on like a formal investigation like this. But
and yet you did, with all that you were going through, you did.
Can you give us a little bit more information about that? Like the investigation and what you were able to put together?
I don't want to say anything real specific because it was, you know, minors involved. But I had reached out multiple times to the pastor couple that were older. I mean, they were probably in their like early 70s, you know, an old white Christian couple who loved this guy like their son. And they were just like, hey, thanks for your email. We want you to know we're praying for you despite this, right? Like they never, like, there was no interest. They were not going to investigate that I was just a crazy person. But
that sounds familiar.
Because they're good Christians.
Such a shitty thing to say. It's so crazy to like use that language of like, we're praying for you. It automatically sets them up higher as like more, you know, like holier than you. Yeah. And then be like, despite you, what? Trying to protect children?
Trying to protect children,
so
for crazy. Fuck's sake.
Yeah.
That's a really shitty thing to say.
So that was all happening. My marriage was falling apart, and I was like, and then my then husband, who was sleeping with sex workers and turned out just had been lying about basically my whole life was a lie. Decided, because he didn't want the marriage to end, right? He's like, whoa. And I was like, I'm out of here. and he was like, so he became a born again Christian through this church. And so he went on a mission to some, I don't know, country in Africa. I don't even remember where they went. Got baptized.
Oh, that poor country in Africa.
I know. Got baptized in the ocean waters of this foreign country. And they like put me on like, you know, Zoom, like live. And everyone was like, praise the Lord. And so now, instead of them asking for accountability for his actions, they were like, hey, back off. This is our new baby Christian. And we recognize he has some issues, but like, he's God's now, and everything is erased, and it's all good.
I want to tell these people he don't need Jesus. He needs therapy and probably some medication.
Yes.
He can have both. It's okay. He can have both. But like, let's get some like.
But it's not. Jesus is
he doesn't need to be shipped off to Africa as like the solution to this obvious problem. And like, where they're obviously not going to like protect him. It's just like, he's going to get away with more, whatever he was up to. He's going to find it there. And he's, I don't know.
But think about, and this is, a true narcissist. Think about how masterful that stroke of genius was.
Yeah.
Yes.
To get out of the line of fire by coming under the covering of Christianity, by getting baptized and saying, hallelujah, I have found the Lord.
Jesus saves.
And then over the next several years, I had never experienced this before, but he really weaponized Christianity, right? Like, and I was like, oh, this is why people fucking
I've never heard of a Christian doing that before.
I hadn't. I'm being serious. I had never experienced it, but he would text me and be like, you're going to hell because you did this. And right. And I was like, oh my God.
You're like, I'm going to hell? Like,
if this is what was my only experience with Christianity, I would absolutely hate you fuckers too, right? Like, I was like, whoa. So anyways, so that was the moment of life I was in. All of that was happening. And I was like, I got to get out of this church. Like, I need some kind of objectivity where I'm not just being told to support, my loving husband. Because I was counseled that. I was like, hey, we were counseled by the older, head pastors. And they were like, the husband was like, this is just you as a wife trying to get out of your marriage. Like, you were looking for an excuse, and the sex worker thing is like your excuse, but really you just want it out. And that's all that this is. And I was like,
what an asshole.
Gotta go.
Once again, the woman's just supposed to put up with absolutely any kind of shit behavior. It's your fault for not being the dutiful wife.
My understanding of that situation is like, if you're having sex with sex workers, like, that's you trying to get out of a relationship. Like, that's the man trying to get out.
That's a you problem, dude. Like,
yes. So I was like, I need help. Like, I really needed refuge. I was in an incredibly vulnerable moment of life. Everything I knew and understood to be my life was absolutely like imploding.
Very traumatizing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I, during that time, had a baby. Like, he sat in the delivery room with me while I gave birth. And I was like, I don't even want you here. But we were literally on the opposite coast. And who else was going to, like, I needed someone in the room. But just being like upset that he was there for the birth of his child because he was so evil. But also, like, I didn't, if I had been in San Diego, my family could have been there. My best friends could have been in the room, and he could have just not, or
fucked
I
off.
wouldn't have been alone with him. But anyways, yes, he could have fucked off. So I needed refuge, and I was always hearing the church had changed. Things were
yes, the
different.
good old line.
This
It's changed. It's different now. They figured it out.
Late 2015, early 2016. This was like the time frame, and everyone's like, it's cool now. All of our generation, they're the pastors, and it's not like it was. And I was like,
well, it was the same.
Well, or worse, I feel like
a little bit.
So I started going to the DC church, which was about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with DC, but the traffic
I used to live there too.
Oh, you did? We have had the same geographic timeline.
I know.
Well, not the same timeline, but at different times we've had the same path.
Yeah,
Okay,
I wish we'd been on the same path because I'd have loved to align with you, you badass.
We could have caused some trouble together.
Yeah. It's not too
I would
late.
have been like,
doing it now.
Get in, bitch. We're running it down.
They would have never let us near each other then. They would have known we'd have caused it.
So I was like, well, let me go check out the DC church. And it was like a 45-minute drive for me. And I had 3 kids, and they were little. I mean, like car seat little, the 2 little ones. And then my oldest was probably like 8, 9-ish. But little, like, this was not easy for me to drive 45 minutes to go to church. And churches were short. The services were shorter. So I would drive 45 minutes. The services would be 45 minutes. And then they would be like, okay, bye. And I was like, oh, like, you guys don't want to hang out with me or like talk to me, or should we go to lunch? They were like, no, we're good. I would just get in my car and drive 45 minutes.
I'll just go fuck myself. See ya.
It was really not particularly like hospitable, not like mean, but not like, oh, fun, you're here. it was like, oh, hey, cool. See you next week. Bye. And I was like, okay.
I would have liked to have gone to a DC service, been involved in the 45 minutes sounds great.
It was
Just
short, yeah.
I mean, like if you live close, like.
Yeah, no, it was super short, especially for the fact that I was driving like an hour and a half round trip. Like the services were.
And you were used to
brief.
San Diego marathon services, right?
Yes. Yeah, like I had packed like snacks for my kids and had, you know, like a whole plan for the whole day. And then it was like over immediately. I was like, oh. So at some point, this was what happened. I had a crisis day. My soon-to-be ex-husband, I don't remember. He must have done the debit card first. Okay, so he was really not in a good emotional space during that time, right? His life that he had carefully crafted to serve him was also falling apart, and he did not enjoy that. And Scott, I think you said something earlier that reminded me of this. I meant to say it earlier, but it's interesting. Oh, it was one of you two talking about how narcissists, maybe it was you, Charity, will actually choose really strong and successful women. And so what I have found is that I added a lot of validation to his life, right? I am incredibly well educated. I'm somebody that gets along with my community. I raise amazing kids. Like,
you made him look good because of who you are.
Yes. And so him losing all of that, and because he was behaving in really deplorable ways, was just not something he was processing well.
Yeah.
And so I don't think he wanted to stay in the marriage because he was so in love with me. He probably never loved me, but he didn't want to lose this carefully curated life that he had
Validation, having you as proof that he was decent. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And so he was really fighting to stay in it. And then when it was clear it wasn't going to work, he was just vicious. I mean, just like the worst stories that you hear about viciousness in divorce. It was just horrific. So I was at the grocery store one day with my kids buying groceries. I'm in the checkout line. I go to check out and they're like, sorry, you know, your debit card doesn't work. And I was like, that's weird. Try it again. And they were like, nope. In fact, it says it's stolen. So I have to keep this. And I was like, when they said stolen, I was like, that motherfucker. So I went home, I called the bank. They're like, yeah, you know, because obviously we were still having a joint account at that point. They were like, yeah, he reported it as stolen. And so sorry for the mix up. It'll take us a few days to get you a new card because that card is done, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh my God, like, how am I going to feed my kids? And then either later that day or the next day, my cell phone cut off. And, you know, we didn't have a landline. And so within a 24-hour period, I had lost all access to my finances and had lost all ability to communicate with anyone outside of my house without like getting in my car and driving somewhere or walking, you know, to a neighbor's house.
With 3 little kids.
But worse, I thought he was going to kill me. Like, I thought that this is what you do, right? If you're going to show up in the middle of the night and murder your wife who's divorcing you, like, this is what you do. I can't run. I have no money. I can't call anyone. I can't call the police. Yeah. And I was like, he's going to fucking kill me. Like, and this happens, right? Like, husbands murder their wives and their children when a family is breaking up. And so I was...
That is terrifying.
I was terrified. That is the only word. And obviously I didn't know if that's what was going to happen, but it sure felt like it was the perfect sort of build up and set up for that.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was terrified. So I'm a really emotionally stable, probably from my trauma. Like, it's even hard for me sometimes to connect with my emotions. Like, I don't really freak out. I was freaking the fuck out. So I don't remember how, but I ended up calling the pastor at DC and trying to get a hold of her. And she was, you know, our age. I think she might even be just a little bit younger than me. But anyways, like our generation. And she just wasn't calling me back. And I'm probably leaving some slightly, you know, intense messages, but like, really, like, please call me.
But you're clearly in distress. Like,
yeah, I was not okay. She never called me. So I was talking to one of my friends in Colorado, who I'm sure you both know, lovely human. And I was basically telling her, I was like, we had, you know, been in San Diego and we had lived in the same communal house. And so I'm now unloading on her. Just, I think I'm going to die. I think he's going to kill me. I don't know. And she's like, well, you need to talk to the pastor. And I was like, I tried.
Oh, don't call the police. Call your pastor. Like,
well, She probably said the police too, but
Okay.
she's a good egg.
She's a good guy in this story, Charity. Don't
Yeah.
make
Oh,
fun of her.
sorry, my bad. Okay. There's so many bad guys. I can't keep them straight. Sorry, whoever you are.
I'm
shame.
sure that you're friends with this person. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
So she calls like the big head honcho of our generation, tall, blonde, and basically says, Rebecca is losing her mind. Like, it's not okay. She's going to die. And the pastor won't get back to her. Anyways, 10 minutes later, the pastor calls me and she's like, hey. Uh-huh. And I was like, oh, hey. And she's like, so I got told to call you, right? And I'm like, well, I was trying to get a hold of you. So I tell her the whole story and I'm definitely wigging out. And she said, and obviously it was a long conversation, but the gist of it, and I'm paraphrasing, was, you need to calm down. He has every right to see his kids. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not trying to keep his kids from him. I'm trying to not die maybe tonight. Like, what do I do? I need spiritual covering. I'm pretty sure that's what I was saying because that's what we were taught. I needed spiritual covering. That's what I was after. Not even like, how do I handle this? Because she wouldn't be trained. But I was like, I need spiritual covering. And she was like, you need to calm down. He has the right to see his kids. If you can't even keep your spirit right, how do you expect him to?
Okay.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh.
So much to unpack and just like that.
Do you see the steam coming out of my ears, you guys? It's like cartoon little.
But here's the worst part though, is because I was so desperate for safety, the safety of a spiritual covering, I was like, oh, yeah, no, I can see I'm freaking out in my spirit. And I guess you're right? Like I, in my vulnerable state was like, okay, like I need help and you're supposed to be the help. And so I have to trust the help God's given me. And so I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, no, I can see that. And just fully like embraced that this was all my fault.
Exactly. At minimum, it's back to that same thing all the way back to like, I don't want to go to prom. It's the same thing. It's like the feelings you're feeling right now stop because they're not valid. Yeah. Everything that you're experiencing right now, all the stuff you're going through, like that's not it. You actually are dumb and wrong in this situation and you need to just like chill the fuck out. Also, the idea of like you, like it's just like so many layers to it of like, you're worried about being murdered, and so you call your shaman to cast a spell over your house to protect you from like the murderer.
That's what we were taught,
coming,
right?
Is like essentially what like you're looking for, and it's so I don't know. It's just like there's so much to it, and then they're like, "Don't worry, no. The spell, like he might be a murderer, but you just need to control your spirit, and everything will be fine.
Everything will be fine."
That was the message, right? If you're under the covering, you're okay. Yep. If you're out from under the covering, you're fucked. And also the message of you're the problem. Yep. You're always the problem.
Yeah. And with men, so both of these two, the dating scenario that you just brought back up, Scott, and this one is the I'm wrong always when it comes to my assessment of men. Always. I'm the one that's wrong. And so I literally to this day, I don't trust myself when it comes to assessing and evaluating men, like to this day, because I'm like, I've just been told my whole life I've done it wrong. And then that pattern has played out and I have done it wrong, or I've been chosen and without being able to escape that. And it just sort of perpetuates. It's really upsetting.
Not to fearmonger, but do you see the escalation just in this story? This is you, the viewer, everybody else out there, like a teenager screwing with the way that they look at their own feelings and their choice and what they want, especially in a romantic partner. Very innocent stuff. Who am I going to prom with? Do you see the escalation of where this ends up with not being able to trust yourself and who you're choosing as a partner, and like the choices that you're making for your own safety later on in life? It just like that,
it's dangerous.
That type of manipulation that we were experiencing in the church that everybody kind of went through, these ripples are hugely problematic later on.
Yes. Yeah. It literally could have cost you your life. Like literally. Because maybe he would have escalated to that point. I mean, your fears were founded. He was obviously crazy.
You needed support and help.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also I know who you're talking about, this young pastor who was our age. And I really feel for her too, because she was making very shitty decisions, but like she was groomed for that and she was emulating what she saw. Everything was like just parroting what she saw and what she was told, this is what you do as a pastor. And that's all she ever knew. Like she was born and raised in it too. And it's like really fucking reckless to put someone that young and inexperienced in life in that type of position where they're responsible for other humans, like other adults or children. But like she was barely an adult herself. Let's face it. Like maybe she was in her 20s. I don't know at the time, but still like probably quite a lot of arrested development because of being raised in that way and like kind of always just being in it.
Yeah. And so going back to the Shabbat that I left because I was upset because my peer, who at the time was definitely sort of a mean girl, and we lived in a communal home together, so we knew each other well. They went through that phase where they were putting all of our generation as like the shepherds over our parents' generation. And they were submitting like their marital problems and their sex lives and like raising their children
to 20-something-year-olds.
Yes.
Like,
and I was like, what the actual fuck is going on? Like, I remember having this conversation with the dad of the family I lived with because the girl that was, my age was dating somebody at the time who was also my age, the brother of the guy I had dated. And they were like set over that family, like as a shepherding couple. And I was like, yeah, but you don't you're not like talking about like your finances
not for realsies, right?
And like raising kids and like your sex life. And they were like, you know how this works.
Have to.
We
this
tell
is
them
Jesus.
everything.
This is Christ in the flesh.
And
this
I was
is
like, that's fucking weird. Like, they don't know what is going on in your life. Like, they haven't lived that life yet. And they were like, this is what divine order looks like. And we're just giving ourselves
divine order for the win.
Oh, my God.
Divine order covers a multitude of incompetencies.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I have a lighter story if you guys want to hear it. That's funny.
Yeah,
sure.
I didn't go to Yes very often, mostly because I had no money because I was literally like living on my own for free with a family from the church from 14 on.
Program.
I had a part-time job starting at 15 and then have never not worked in my entire life, but it wasn't like go spend the summer in Iowa money. So I went one year and, same thing. They were courting me and they didn't officially make me a YASP leader, but they would invite me to like some of the leadership things. And I had seen one of the guys who was like a big leader for our generation and we were friends. But he was like out at bedtime in the hallways, like flirting with all the girls. And I was just like, I don't know. Like, I love you, man. But like, it felt like not the dynamic I was looking for in a leader of, YASP. And so when they invited me to one of the like late night, leadership meetings, I mentioned it in front of everyone. I was like, is that what we're doing? And they were like, get out.
I love it.
They were like, yes, that is what we're doing.
That is actually
what do you
what we're
mean?
Didn't you know we're a sex cult?
Exactly what we're doing. Anyways, I was not ever invited back to Yes leadership. But
do not question anything or you will never be in leadership.
No.
I know we're running out of time, but like I do want to ask before we let you go, you'd mentioned some stuff with your family dynamics, like your biofam.
Yeah, man, that was another thing for me as I was listening to you, Scott, talk about your mom and listening to other people who had come on the podcast talking about their families and hearing Rick Ross talk about how people become cult hoppers essentially. And I was like, my God, like once I sort of slowed down and looked, I was like, my nuclear family was just epically massacred in the same patterns that were just so pervasive from this culture in every single one of them. And I always knew it on some level because I would joke about how I'm really the only like normal person in my family. Like I'm like, if you guys knew the rest of my family, you'd be like, wow, good job being normal. But you know, my dad and my little brother, who I think you guys, Charity, I'm sure you knew my brother. I don't know. He was never in LA, so you might not have known him, Scott. But
I do. I remember him. Yeah.
He was always in either San Diego or Shiloh. He worked on the farm a lot.
Yeah, I remember him from Shiloh.
Yeah. They both, you know, at some point, like officially cut ties with the Living Word Church. And then my dad went into Scientology. And in Scientology, I don't know if I can like say it's a cult or not, but the behaviors I experienced while he was in it were cult-like behaviors. He tried really hard to recruit me into Scientology. And I was like married with a kid at this point. Like I was cooked. Like you raised me as a Christian. Like I'm done. Like this is not the time to like recruit me into a new, like different version. I was like, I'm good. Like I'm all done. So they tried really hard. I mean, we would get like these spam, like recruiting calls all the time. And so one day I was like, listen, I don't know how to tell you guys, but it's not me. Like, no matter how many times you guys call my house, it's not me. I'm never going to do it. That's fine if my dad wants to be in it, but that's it. That was the last I ever heard from my dad for like the next 10 years. And actually, I didn't have my first kid yet. That same year, I got pregnant and had my first daughter that year. The next year, my mom died of cancer, which we'll talk about. And my grandma died, who was one of the closest people in the world to me. My dad stayed silent through all of that, through the birth of all three of my kids, the death of my mother, his ex-wife, the only woman who ever bore him any children, never reached out. Like major life milestones. He was like, nope. And he wrote me a letter that basically said, because, you know, you won't come to see and agree with my worldview, you can't be in my life anymore. And I remember I had that letter like stuck on a corkboard in my kitchen because I would miss my dad. And I would be like, oh, I should reach out and call him. And every time I had that instinct, I would read the letter and be like, this is not the person that you miss, right? Like, it's not who you're thinking it is. You're not going to get what you're looking for. And I would read the letter and be like, okay, nope, I'm not going to call him. But so for 10 years, he didn't ever and was not a part of my life. And then he ended up leaving Scientology and going to another Christian cult group, which my brother also joined. And
what's the name of that?
The cult that they're in now is called the 12 Tribes.
Oh, that's great. That's a good name.
That's a great cult name. Yeah. It's always like the something.
If Christian hippies intersect with the Amish, that's sort of what it is. They live in like rural farmlands. It's like, what do you call it? Socialism. Whatever you earn just goes into like the collective bank account. Yeah,
proper communism. It's a commune.
Yes, and if you have a need, you have to ask, and they'll decide if your need is important enough. So they don't have their own cars, they don't have their own phones, and so they can't come see you because they'll ask, "Hey, can I go see my kid?" And they're like, "Well, you're literally using the communal car to just go do your own thing." And so in that space, my dad calls once or twice a year for the last however many years he's been in that. But my brother, and I
found myself a quarter. I could use the public phone so I could make this phone call. Yes.
My little brother used to sneak over. He would go sell their produce at like the Ocean Beach Farmers Market. And then because they wouldn't know exactly how long he would be gone, he'd leave like an hour early and then come to my house. But the whole time he would be antsy. Like, I can't stay too long because like he would be there sort of secretly. And eventually I would just follow him wherever he went because I always wanted him to feel like he had a way out if he ever just like there was no talking him out of it. But I wanted to like stay a presence in his life and generally was, you know, accepting of his life choices because I thought maybe someday he'd be like, oh, wait, help.
And that's what Rick Ross had recommended, right? Rick Ross had said, if you have a family member, like try to stay connected with them so that at least they have someone like as a voice of reason, or even if you don't say anything, they know you're there. They should get like an idea.
And at some point, quite a while after my mom died, I got a call from some relative that said that she had a small stake in her mom's house and they had sold it. And we got like $5,000 each or something like that. And they couldn't get a hold of my brother. So I got a hold of him and I was like, hey, and by this time he had, I think, his first kid. He has several now. But I was like, why don't you let me hold on to this? I'll just put it in like, an interest earning savings account. I won't touch it or do anything. And then, like if your kid ever wants to go to college, it'll be like a little tiny nest egg to get started with. And he's like, oh, she is not going to college, right? Like we don't believe in that. And I'm like, well, but what if? And he's like, just send me the money. And he made me send it to him and he just gave it to the community. And there it went.
Yeah.
And
that's what happens. Yeah.
So at some point I was up seeing him and he was like, I don't know, he's like, let's go for this walk in the woods. And I was like, cool. And he was being really sort of contemplative. And I don't know why I haven't learned this yet, but often in my life, people have asked me for my honest opinion about something and then been really angry when I offered it, which is how this story ends.
Oh, Never learn this lesson. Never learn this lesson.
No, just
always
keep
give
being
the
real.
honest
Keep
opinion.
being real. Yeah.
So we're walking along and I can tell, he's having deep thoughts and he says, do you think I seem happy here? And I was like, whoa, like that's kind of a deep question. And so I thought about it and he had, growing up in the church, it hadn't gone well for him. And at some point, shortly after he had turned 18, he had turned to substance abuse and gotten into some real serious trouble. And I'll tell you that this particular cult, he was clean and sober and had been for years and was in a relationship with another, human that they ended up getting married and having kids. So it wasn't like the worst thing ever. Like I had seen him in much worse settings. So I said something along those lines. I was like, hey, I don't know, you're the only one who can know if you're happy, but, you're sober, you're clean, like you seem okay. And I said, I like, you don't seem particularly sort of joyful to me, right? Like you seem better than terrible, but not like thriving. I said something like, I felt like it was a very measured response to a pretty deep and vulnerable question. And I don't know what that whole scenario really was in the end, but he was like, fuck you, get out of my life. We're the only ones who know Jesus. And I was like, listen, I said, you should feel comforted that you guys are not holding all of the cards and the only humans that know God on earth. I said, God has different expressions and people know Jesus in around the globe. And he was like, no, you guys, all you other Christians are worshiping a demon who is pretending to be Jesus.
That's intense.
Oh, duh. Now it all makes sense.
And he said, since you're of the world, that is the exact word, the phrase he used, of the world, you can't be in my life anymore. And,
oh my God.
And he was like, and I was like, I don't know. He said, I was, arguing and trying to salvage the situation. And he goes, I don't know what you want from me. And I said, I want you to be my brother and I want you to be in my life and I want you to love me and let me love you. Like, that's what I want. I want you to be an uncle to my kids. And this is where it ended for me. He said, because you're of the world, your kids are too. And I don't even know them. And so they're not like anything to me. Like your kids are nothing to me. And I was like, oh, well then, like if you're going to come for my kids, like now you've got like mama bear instead of like sister trying to save you. And I was like, alrighty then, sounds good. I mean, that's it. I've never talked to him in it was probably 10 plus years ago.
That is so awful.
Yeah.
That's really
I am
sad.
so sorry.
But what I saw is that my family, the men in my family had become the cult hoppers, they just have never been able to get free of needing that sort of structure that is very familiar of control and oppression.
It's
I
so
think that's the
common.
name of this episode. It's going to be Ugh, Men.
Men, am I right?
Perfect. If you knew me, that's perfect. Charity, you said I basically had to get into the space for today. So I sort of like binge watched episodes of the podcast last night because once I walk away from it, it really, I don't know if I bury it deep or if there's just enough distance, but I kind of am like, wait, what was I going to talk about? You know, and then I watched the episodes and I just immediately, you know, feel all the feels and the anger. But you said men be out here menning. And I was like, aren't they though? They are always out here menning.
What is the deal with that? Like, maybe I need to talk to some, I don't know, but like, what is the deal with that? Like, there's something, I don't know if there's something bigger in like human culture or whatever, but like all of this stuff where it's like taking it to that extreme. Like, I'm just thinking about like getting involved in like cult after cult. I look at men, I get so disappointed when like you're so capable, physically capable, intelligent, like all kinds of just like you got everything you need. Just you are allowed to open bank accounts in your own name. You have like all the control, like in this
and always
world
have.
is set
They
up.
always have.
The cabinets are built for like an adult man to like reach into. Everything's built for us, you know, and yet it's like, oh my gosh, life is a little bit hard. I need to go join this commune cult so that they can control my life for me and like take care of me. Yeah. It's just we can't handle it. Like, what's the deal with that?
I have a theory about that if you want to know. And like, I'm not educated on this, but my theory is like men since the dawn of time, like you've been privileged, especially white men. It's like everything is built for you. And women have had to fight for everything. And so we've learned how to be resilient. We've learned how to be strong. We've learned how to like deal with a lot of shit. And I feel like a lot of men, it's just like something doesn't go their way or they're having a hard, it's like, oh, boom, I can't handle it. And it's like, sorry, I'm sounding like a little bit of a bitch, but yeah, it's so you're used to having all the privileges in the world. And when you're faced with not having that, it does make you stronger, more resilient.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to get a lot of shit for this later.
No, just to back you up on this. So my doctoral research was how to support minoritized women in higher education STEM. That was all of my research.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Because they are this like invisible missing piece in STEM. White women are in STEM. And there's some other Asian women tend to do well in STEM. But if you look at like Black women in STEM, the participation is like 3%. If you look at Latinx women in STEM, it's like 4%. I mean, they're just literally missing. And so I initially, when I started my doctorate, was like, why are they missing, first of all? And then how do we get them and keep them? And a lot of it was, why would I want to be in that environment? Because STEM, especially higher education STEM, is just sort of the pinnacle of toxic masculinity and patriarchal, like systematically, the science, math, engineering, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Okay.
And so in my area, which is the physical sciences, which is chemistry and physics, it's like computer science is also like top 3, like worst treatment of women. Like if you look at the statistics, some astronomically high percentage of women have experienced sexual harassment, some less, but also incredibly high percentage of women in STEM have experienced sexual assault. You're just constantly condescended to. But so all of that to say, this is kind of my like whole world right here. So I have a work friend who has become, he didn't used to be, but he's just become an incredible ally. And, you know, he's a PhD chemist and just has really been incredible. So we've been battling some of the toxic parts of the culture from especially white men. But when you get really well educated white men who find themselves to be quite intelligent and worthy of speaking and being listened to, it gets the worst. So he and I have sort of been systematically attacking and trying to make those types of behaviors uncomfortable for the perpetrators of it. And recently, and I don't want to be too specific here, but recently there was a plan that he had put in place that just did not get the support that he wanted from someone he wanted to support it. And I would say this to his face. In fact, I will send him this podcast afterwards, but he had a real meltdown. Like afterwards, he's like, I'm like embarrassed about how angry and upset and how much of a meltdown I had. And I thought about it for a couple of days and I sent him this text. I could probably just read it to you because it was pretty funny. I was like, welcome to the fucking party, right? Like where what is right is not supported. What is right fails, although it should not. And I was like, listen, you can quit. 'Cause he's like, I'm quitting like this role that he has. And I was like, I hear you. It's incredibly devastating to have this like time after time after time to lose these battles. And I was like, I understand, like no judgment on my part. But just so you know, like you think I'm so amazingly resilient. I'm like, this has been my life experience since birth, where what is right that I'm saying is right is truly objectively right and still fails and is rejected and is said to be wrong, etc. And so I was like, welcome to the party, bitch. Like,
I love it. Yes.
This is the party bus.
Did you almost give him the same speech you gave your daughter who like was like not getting her way? It's like, you can quit, you can do this, but just so you know, you should keep working. Like, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. And he is a phenomenal ally. But just to see a man lose battles that he thinks is just 100% winnable, and then just the like rage that came after it. And I was like, oh, he's like, how can you have these horrible experiences and then you're like fine 10 minutes later? I'm like, because it's my whole life. Like I've done this 1,000,001 times. So you can't invest that much rage into every battle you lose, because there will be 10 more today.
You know, it's not to invalidate the experience of men. Like you guys suffer too, you're traumatized too. It's not to say, but it's like, maybe instead of women being perceived as like the weaker sex and like, oh, we're just so emotional. Actually, no, like maybe take a cue from us that we don't just like, get knocked down and be like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Because we we don't have that choice. Yeah. We would never get anywhere in life if we like let, some adverse circumstance or experience just cut us out, cut us out of the, what am I trying to say? You know what I'm trying to say.
Your only option would be to like lay down and die. Like that would be, up. I mean, the devastation that women experience emotionally, mentally, physically. Someone recently said that they were assaulted. And I was like, oh my God. And it was a guy. And I was like, what happened? And they were like, well, the student threw some water at me and then ran. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I could see how that might be upsetting. When you say assault, like for me, I mean, women are getting raped and murdered and maimed every day of the year, all around the globe. And so I'm like, can we use a different word than assault?
Yeah.
It's like I can't go for a walk in the woods by myself without feeling like I'm under threat. And I don't think men think about that as much. And imagine
it's
being
expectations.
Yeah. And imagine being like a woman of color. Like that's just even the compounded racism and being a woman.
Yep. Yes.
I feel like there's a little bit of that, like with men, it's like you're talking about that privilege and stuff. It's that the privilege, like a lot of people don't even like the word privilege, especially like white privilege or, male privilege or whatever, because it doesn't feel like privilege. Like I don't have privilege. My life is this. I still don't make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. But it's like you're saying the privilege of like walking alone at night, is one of the, and we don't, if we're failing later in life, or if we're getting water thrown in our face, like later in life, and it's like nothing like that has ever happened before. It's like the expectation is like here all the way at the top. And then when something like down here, it becomes like, here it's like life is supposed to be here. And then when it falls to there, it's just like anything, any other privilege, monetary privilege, whatever. And when it's like, when you're way down here and you fight for like this, you're like, man, things are really, really working out for me, And so there's a little bit of the imbalance is, I think, part of the reason we whine so much as men, I'm speaking for all of us, is because like now all of a sudden they're building cabinets lower, and it's like, I liked them where they were because they were up here where I could reach stuff,
Yeah, how do you feel about all this as the only man in this group right now? Do you feel attacked, or do you? You're a pretty good feminist, though. Like you get it. You're a good feminist.
Yeah, I definitely have thrown my fits in my time, and I will probably continue to throw them as I like. As I learn, but that's what like learning is.
Yeah.
It's like it's a little bit, it's challenging. So,
and for all of us, I mean, literally all of us, especially as white people. The unlearning is never gonna stop.
Absolutely.
Well,
it's the willingness to learn
yes.
that's the most important, and
to reflect
and to be called out for shit.
Absolutely. And that's why talking about things, no matter what they are, but talking about things is so important, because if you can hear that there's a different perspective, you might align with it, but you might also have the opportunity then to reflect and grow yourself and change your own worldview, which is not easy to do.
It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
Very. Well, just to finish up the last family stuff. Sorry, I know we got way off track there.
No, it's fun.
But
it was fun. A little man-hating diatribe, a little tangent.
Whoa, man-hating. I don't know if it was
sorry.
that.
Did I say that out loud? I thought that was my internal dialogue.
We love men. We love men.
We do.
So my mom, I'm in a very jokey mood now, which is going to make me telling this story awkward.
Just adds levity. It's fine.
Welcome to the Oops, I'm in a Cult.
Yes, I mean, we're all about the inappropriate humor over here. So.
Well, so my mom died of cancer, and in much the way, I mean, Scott, when you told your story about your mom, I was just like, oh my God, like that was the thing. Every story I heard, I was like, oh my God, me too. And oh my God, that was my mom. And oh my God, that was my brother. And oh my God, like I just could not get away from how much every story resonated and echoed my own life. And that really shook me, because again, I thought I had got out early and I had chosen to leave and I had escaped and I was fine. But it turns out I'm not fine. But my mom had cancer and wasn't even in the church. So she wasn't even asking permission like your poor mother was. But still, even without asking for permission, she still refused all of the traditional medicine treatment because she thought it was poison, and she was doing all these healthy alternatives. But she had been, I remember telling someone years before she died, I think my mom has breast cancer, because she kept talking about these fibroid tumors that she would get in her breast and how she would treat them. And she would do all of these, holistic things, and they would go away and they'd come back and they'd go away. And she had it under control, and it wasn't cancer. It was, fibroid tumors, which were benign, she said. And I was like, I don't know. The family that took me in, that I lived in basically all through high school, was also very, very crunchy granola, healthy. And I remember telling the mom, I said, I think my mom has breast cancer. And she was like, oh my God, why? And so I was describing it, and she's like, have you talked to her? And I was like, yeah, of course I did. But she wouldn't see a doctor. And by the time she actually saw the doctor, she had breast cancer that was stage 4, that had traveled all throughout her spine. And
wow.
They tried to, they basically said, hey, you're going to die no matter what. Like, this is the end, but we could extend your life by a couple of years. And she was like, nope. And so they said, well, your back is literally breaking, like it was cracking her spine. And they said, we have to go in and stabilize it. And so she went into this crazy back surgery, and we were waiting for hours, and actually the guys never came out. And so I tracked the neurosurgeon down, and I was like, what the hell, man?
They never came out to tell you what happened.
He was wrecked because it didn't go well. And I think I don't know if he didn't want to come out, or he didn't even process that he was supposed to. But when I tracked him down, and I did, he was like, it's all bad news, right? Like her bones, he said she had such severe osteoporosis that it was like operating on a 90-year-old woman, and she was like 62. And he said, I couldn't stabilize anything. Like, her bones were like mush. And so there was no stabilization possible. And he's like, so I closed her up, but like, she's worse now, because now she's had back surgery and her spine is even more unstable. So I was like, so what's next? And he's like, I'm going to call in some bone cement specialists, and they're going to like put bone cement in her bones so that we could then at least stabilize her spine so she can like go to the bathroom and stuff. And I was like, okay, so we did all of that. They went back in for the second surgery, pumped her full of bone cement, put brackets on her spine so that she could generally move, and just said, there is no fixing this scenario. Like, she's for sure going to die. But she didn't want chemo. She didn't want radiation. She just laid down and died. And that was it. And she was dead 6 months later, and never tried any level of medical intervention.
Well, it's interesting that, like, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I just wanted to ask about when she was saying that she was, having what was it? The like lumps or whatever.
Fibroid
tumors.
Yeah, the fibroid tumor. She wasn't seeing a doctor to get that diagnosis before.
That's what I was going to ask too.
And she had also, someone in the Valley had given her something. So she had melanoma runs in my family, so skin cancer. And, she grew up, her dad was a lifeguard at La Jolla Beach. And so she literally grew up in a playpen on La Jolla Beach, like her whole childhood before they knew about sunscreen, because this was like back in the 50s. And so she had really, really bad skin cancer as well. And so instead of getting that medically treated or having it diagnosed, somebody in the Valley, one of the like leadership guys, gave her something called black salve. And I don't remember, I definitely looked into it back in the day. I don't even remember what's in it now, but you're supposed to put it on your cancerous lesions. And so she did that. And this stuff worked because what it did was it literally started attacking her cells and following it like throughout her body. And so she ended up horrifically scarred. Like the whole side of her face was like cratered, but not like if like her flesh wasn't even there and it was just like skin now, and it had gone around and like come out her neck here, and her whole neck was like scar tissue, like wrapping around. And she just kept using it because one of the leaders from the LA church told her that this is how you fight cancer naturally. And so even before all of that, she would always have like these big bandages on her face because her face was like if you think like Batman villain in a movie, just like horrifically like open flesh wound scarring.
Gosh. How long? A
long time, several years before she died.
Wow.
And then
was it? Can I just? Was that John?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like the guy that would do
the
it.
dentist strikes again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she was never going to survive physically, right? Like she was always going to die of some preventable and curable disease. Mm-hmm. But she did not survive it, and she died at 62. So
do you feel like a lot of that, like, the church promoted so much of the alternative treatment that like Absolutely. Everything progressed so much quicker.
Absolutely.
Than it needed to.
Well, just she wouldn't get help. Like she literally, the only reason she ended up having the surgeries is because she was because her spine was cracked in more than one place. She couldn't live alone anymore. And finally called and was like, I need help. And so we got her to the emergency room and they admitted her, and they were like, yeah, you're going to die. Like, you're literally like just here at death's doorstep. And it was obviously upsetting, but I don't remember what episode it was, but you guys showed the whole like Maryland Farms supplement and how Gary was like, it wasn't the medicine that cured him. It was like God's covering and all of that. And that's what, I mean, we're talking about how we all left in one way or another the church, knowing that it was bad, and how pervasive those thought patterns and thinking are still, and how they sort of just pop up and you're like, whoa, hello. Like, I can't believe you're still in there. That voice in my head. And our parents' generation didn't really leave, right? Like, and so the pervasiveness and the power of Gary's voice saying, if you're faithful enough, God will heal you. And if not, something's wrong. So I guess you probably this is what God wants for you. She was never gonna get help, and she obviously had cancer on multiple levels and probably for years and years and years. But, the upsetting part here is that I don't have parents, right? Like, my kids don't have grandparents. And it's all because of that church. Like, if my mom had been a normal human, she would have gotten medical treatment and maybe she would have lived longer. Maybe she wouldn't have, who knows? But I imagine with early intervention, the cancers that she ended up dying of would have either been treatable or could have staved off death longer. And my dad, you know, is just cult to cult to cult. And he, like I said, he calls me once or twice a year and says, what's up? Tells me how much he misses me and says he's going to visit and write and never does. And so I go, cool. Nice to hear from you. And that's all. Like for me, I've had to understand that I don't have a dad in any traditional sense of the word, even though he's alive. And then, you know, my little brother, who was like my partner in crime and life, also gone. My older brother, I wrote this in some of the comments on some of the early episodes I watched, but he was a rebel, like a true rebel, really, really smart, which was probably the issue. Went to the Kingdom School at Shiloh and just got in so much trouble all the time. I think he finally broke into JRS's apartment and stole booze, and they like set him out of the body, right? And he
with JRS's booze, that's his lifeline.
He was just not having it, right? He was like, oh, you don't want me to be bad? Like, watch me escalate this. And was ridiculously intelligent. And I think he was bored out of his mind, and the school was never a challenge. Like, he would get in trouble for causing a ruckus during a test. And then they would call home and, you know, they would be so just incensed about his behavior. But he would have 100% on the test that he would have done in like 10 minutes flat, and just sat there then for an hour messing with his friends. So anyways, they sent him away back to California when I was 5, I think. And he never was friendly with the church. Like after that, like he was never like, oh, it's cool, I'll hang out sometime. Like it was done. And so I lost my older brother. I lost my little brother. My mom died, and my dad might as well be dead because he's not and has not been in my life. Like my kids have met him once or twice. And my oldest is 16 years old, and my youngest is about to be 11. And so I don't know why I didn't put that all together. Like, this is what I started out saying. I feel so basic, like I'm just a basic bitch. Because
no, not at all.
This is like so textbook, right? And somehow I thought I had like escaped it all and made it out and chose to leave, and I was fine. And I am fine, but my family's not fine. And there are ways I'm not fine and that I didn't ever make it out. And I was telling a friend who I have, you know, known since the church school recently that I still find myself, this is my like scary cult thinking that creeps in where I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you are too old to think this. But if things start like not going well in my life, like let's say I get a flat tire and my car is 5 years old, so it needs a new battery, and that is unexpected. Like if little circumstantial things start going in my life, I start thinking, oh, well, I don't go to church anymore. And I really have a sort of tortured relationship with God. Like I still believe in God, but it's not like healthy or good or something I know how to express in a way that makes sense to me, that doesn't make me cry. I cannot go to church. So I'm probably like outside of the covering, God's covering.
And that's why these things are happening.
And so bad things happen. And I was like, oh my God, no, no dummy.
It happens to me too. The same thing seeps in.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Rebecca, thank you so much. Like that, all of that stuff, it's just amazing, you know, and I think, you know, I definitely see a lot of parallels, you and me, in like that experience. And with your mom, it is the same thing, because it's the worst, the most poisonous thing of all of that. Like the cancer is like a metaphor for that poison of the word that was spoken, those instructions of like, don't trust the rest of the world. We've got the secret here,
right?
You know, and your dad's still like chasing after that somehow, you know, and your whole family, it's like that same thing is happening, copy paste 1,000 different ways. And you said, it's like, oh, it's textbook. And it is textbook, but it doesn't feel textbook when it's you.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to not see it.
Yeah.
Because you're experiencing it and it's like, this is rough. This is my life and it's not working the way it's supposed to. And then you read a textbook and you're like, oh shit, that's my life. And it's
well, for me, the textbook was Rick Ross, I think, right? As I was like, oh, so this was a bad And then hearing everyone's stories, I was like, oh, that's my story. And oh, that's my brother's story. And oh my God, that's my mom's story. And oh my God, every person that comes on your podcast is telling some story from my life. And then I was like, oh, I didn't escape. Shit.
And then some of the deeper, and what's beautiful about that is like, then some of the deeper healing can begin, because until we know what's going on there or recognize it, have an awareness of it, like it just sits. And then, and it's so validating. None of us were ever allowed to talk about any of this before. So when you hear these other stories, it's so validating. You're like, oh my God, it wasn't just me. Yes, it was that bad. I am traumatized for a reason, and I'm allowed to be this fucked up. I have a reason to be this fucked up. And now I have a choice. I have a choice. Ziggy, shush. Mommy's talking.
Men always interrupting.
Always. It's always the... He's like, how dare this human walk across the street in front of my house?
I did not permit that activity. Well, I do want to just say thank you guys for doing all this work, because I started out today with you guys telling you how I was really impressed at the level of avoidant behavior I was witnessing in myself the last 36 hours in particular, when I was like, oh, it's this weekend, this thing that we're doing. And so I can't imagine what it's like to do this day in and day out and read all this stuff and watch all those videos and have to sort of help bear the burden of people's stories and trauma. There's no way that doesn't take its own toll. And it's healing, of course, but it's also exhausting, I'm sure. Yeah. So thank you guys very much. Well,
it's going to be a little bit like how you're probably going to feel over the next few days, is how we kind of feel. It is challenging to do this and like have to deal with it, but it's also like ultimately cathartic. Like working out or something, like you just feel stronger.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's like that's what I was gonna say. Is like once it's in your awareness, you have the choice. What am I gonna do with this? And do I want to be defeated by this? I am what I choose to be. I don't choose to remain a victim. I recognize I was victimized, but I don't need to own that as my identity. And now I can move forward by like talking about this hard stuff and listening to the hard stuff. Like avoiding it is delicious, but it doesn't ever solve the problem. So like I always say that dumb saying, you have to feel it to heal it. Yeah. But you got to take it in whatever doses that you're ready for. And that's something that I've had to learn, is like when I need to take a break from my own like inner journey too, and just like, just whatever, ignore it. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. And then I'll come back to it. So.
That's what I experienced with your guys' podcasts. I would watch like 2 episodes and then I would be like, I can't, like, I have to be done with this. And I would walk away for like a week. And like a week later, I'd be like, okay, let's see what they're doing this week. And they're always so totally interesting. I'm like, ooh, let me in. And then I'm like, ooh, let me out. Like,
yeah. That's probably
healthy. You can come and go as much as you want. This isn't a cult. You can get out, go away as long as you want.
We take breaks too.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Ziggy's saying it's time's up. Rebecca, thank you so much. This was so good.
Yeah, I
really
could talk to you for hours. You're so incredible.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for giving all of us a space to work these things out. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Of course. No problem.
Thanks for listening to Oops, I'm in a Cult.
Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Follow us on Instagram at Oops, I'm in a Cult Podcast.
Support us on Supercast by visiting our website at oopsiminacult.com to subscribe and receive exclusive bonus content.
Or email us at oopsiminacult@gmail.com.
Take it easy and don't join a cult. If you or someone you know has a mental illness, is struggling emotionally, or has concerns about their mental health, there are ways to get help. Use the resources linked in the description to find help for you, a friend, or a family member.